The mountain town of Ashford, nestled in the Cascade Range of Washington state, had always been a place where reputation meant everything. For generations, the logging families had built their empires on straight timber, perfect cuts, and construction that could withstand anything nature threw their way. In this world of precision and pride, Thomas Merrick was considered the town joke. Thomas had inherited his grandfather's small logging operation after the old man passed 3 years ago. The property sat on the eastern edge of town, where the forest grew wild and unpredictable. While other loggers selected only the straightest pines and firs, Thomas worked with what most considered garbage. Twisted trees, bent trunks, logs that curved like question marks. His grandfather had taught him something the others had forgotten, but in Ashford, tradition mattered more than wisdom. Every Thursday, the loggers gathered at Hank's Hardware to pick up supplies and share stories. Thomas would walk in with his list, and the whispers would start immediately. Bill Crawford, who ran the largest operation in 3 counties, never missed an opportunity to make Thomas feel small. That particular Thursday in late September, Thomas approached the counter with his usual order. Bill stood near the window with his crew, their laughter echoing through the store. "Hey Merrick," Bill called out, voice dripping with mockery. "I heard you're building another one of those crooked shacks of yours. What is it this time? A barn that looks like it's already falling over?" The men around Bill erupted in laughter. Thomas kept his eyes on Hank, who was tallying up the order, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding in his store. Bill continued, emboldened by his audience. "I mean, seriously, who taught you to build? A drunk carpenter? Those logs you use look like they grew sideways. My 5-year-old could pick straighter timber than you." Thomas finally turned to face them. His weathered hands gripped the counter edge, knuckles white. He was 42 but looked older, the mountain sun and hard work having carved deep lines into his face. His flannel shirt was patched in 3 places, his boots worn down at the heels. "My grandfather taught me," Thomas said quietly, "and these logs have purpose." "Purpose?" Bill stepped closer, his expensive Gore-Tex jacket rustling. "The purpose of making you the laughingstock of Ashford? Come on, Tom. You're wasting good land with those eyesores. Why don't you sell to someone who knows what they're doing?" The other loggers nodded in agreement. In Ashford, Bill Crawford's word was law. His properties lined the main road into town, perfect cabins with perfect logs, each one a testament to modern engineering and traditional craftsmanship. Tourists came from Seattle just to photograph his work. Thomas's cabins, hidden back in the hills, were never mentioned in the town brochures. Thomas paid for his supplies and loaded them into his battered pickup truck. As he drove back up the winding mountain road toward his property, he passed Crawford's showcase cabin, the one that had been featured in Mountain Living magazine. It stood proud and tall, every log perfectly straight, every corner precisely 90 degrees. It was, by all conventional standards, a masterpiece. His own property looked different. 3 cabins stood among the trees, each one built with those crooked, twisted logs everyone mocked. They seemed to lean into the wind rather than stand against it. The walls curved slightly, following the natural bend of the timber. To most eyes, they looked unstable, temporary, wrong. But Thomas knew better. His grandfather had spent 60 years studying these mountains. The old man had survived the 1949 earthquake, the tremors of '65, and countless smaller quakes that most people had forgotten about. He had learned something crucial. In a landscape that moved, rigidity was death. Thomas walked through his largest cabin, running his hand along the interlocking logs. Each piece had been carefully selected not despite its curve but because of it. The joints locked together like puzzle pieces, each twist and bend creating natural tension that held the structure together. When the ground shifted, these walls would move with it, flex with it, absorb the energy instead of fighting it. That evening, as the sun set behind the Cascades, Thomas sat on his porch and looked at the work ahead of him. He had a commission, surprisingly, from a young couple from Portland who had somehow heard about his different approach. They wanted a small cabin for weekend retreats. The deposit they'd put down would keep him going for another few months. But the doubt crept in, as it always did. Maybe Bill was right. Maybe he was just fooling himself. clinging to the old ways because he didn't know any better. Maybe his grandfather's wisdom had died with him, and Thomas was just too stubborn to see it. He didn't know that in 72 hours, everything would change. The earth beneath Ashford was about to speak, and it would reveal which builder had truly understood its language. The meeting at Town Hall on Friday morning was supposed to be routine. Mayor Patricia Henderson had called it to discuss the annual Timber Festival, but Bill Crawford had other plans. He'd brought architectural plans, surveys, and a proposal that would change everything. Thomas sat in the back row, nursing a coffee that had gone cold. The room was packed with loggers, business owners, and longtime residents. Bill stood at the front, his presentation already loaded on the projector screen. "I'm proposing we establish building standards for Ashford," Bill announced, his voice carrying authority. "We're attracting more tourists every year, more people wanting to build vacation homes here. We need to protect our reputation as a premier mountain destination." The screen showed photographs of various cabins around town. Then Bill clicked to the next slide, and Thomas's stomach dropped. There were his cabins, photographed from the worst possible angles, looking unstable and chaotic compared to the pristine structures shown before them. "These buildings represent everything we should not allow in Ashford," Bill continued. "Crooked logs, unconventional designs, structures that frankly look like they might collapse in a strong wind. I'm not naming names here, but we all know whose work this is." Every head in the room turned to look at Thomas. He felt heat rising to his face, the weight of their judgment crushing down on him. Mayor Henderson shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Bill, I'm not sure this is the appropriate forum to—" "With all due respect, Mayor, this is exactly the appropriate forum." Bill's tone was sharp now, cutting. "We're talking about property values, about safety, about the image of our town. I've spoken with a structural engineer who's willing to testify that these so-called cabins are potential hazards." Thomas stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's a lie. My buildings are solid. They've been inspected and approved." Bill smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Approved by old Charlie Morrison, who retired last year. We have new inspectors now, Tom. Inspectors who understand modern building codes. I've already filed complaints with the county. They'll be coming to evaluate your properties next week." The room erupted in whispers. Thomas looked around, searching for a friendly face, but found only avoidance and pity. Even old friends from his grandfather's generation looked away. In a town like Ashford, going against Bill Crawford was social suicide. Sarah Chun, who owned the bookstore, raised her hand tentatively. "Isn't Thomas's grandfather's original cabin still standing? The one built in the 30s? That seems like proof the method works." Bill waved dismissively. "That old shack? It's been standing because nobody's touched it. Give it one good storm and it'll come down. Mark my words, those crooked logs are an accident waiting to happen." Thomas walked out before the vote was even called. He knew how it would go. The town would side with Crawford. They always did. Thomas spent Saturday working alone on the young couple's cabin, each hammer strike echoing his frustration. By Sunday morning, he'd made a decision. He would document everything, prove his grandfather's methods weren't just folklore but actual engineering genius. If he was going down, he'd go down fighting. He set up his old camcorder on a tripod inside his largest cabin, planning to record the structural integrity, explain the logic behind every curved log and interlocking joint. As he adjusted the focus, his phone buzzed. A text from his sister in Seattle. "Turn on the news now." Thomas grabbed the remote and switched on the small TV in the corner. The emergency broadcast signal filled the screen, followed by a stern-faced geologist from the University of Washington. "We're detecting significant seismic activity along the Cascades fault line. A swarm of minor earthquakes began at approximately 6:43 this morning. Residents in mountain communities should prepare for potential tremors throughout the day. This is not a drill." The ground beneath Thomas's feet rumbled gently, as if the mountain was clearing its throat. He'd felt these small quakes before, they were common enough. But something about the geologist's expression told him this was different. His phone exploded with messages. The hardware store was closing early. The mayor had opened the community center as a gathering point. Bill Crawford was telling everyone to evacuate to the valley. Thomas stayed put. He moved through each of his cabins, checking joints, testing connections. Everything felt solid. The curved logs seemed to breathe with the earth's movement, absorbing each small tremor like a ship riding waves. Then it hit. Not the big one, not yet, but significant. A 4.9 magnitude quake that lasted 18 seconds. Thomas braced himself in the doorway, watching as his walls swayed gently, the crooked logs flexing and settling back into place. A coffee cup slid across the table but didn't fall. The structure groaned but held. When the shaking stopped, Thomas ran outside. Dust rose from the direction of town. He jumped in his truck and drove down the mountain road, his heart pounding. As he rounded the bend where Crawford's showcase cabin stood, he slammed on the brakes. The masterpiece was destroyed. Not completely collapsed, but the front wall had buckled. Straight logs snapped like matchsticks where they'd refused to bend. The perfect 90-degree corners had become the structure's weakness, concentrating stress at single points until they failed. The cabin stood at a sickening angle, windows shattered, the roof sagging dangerously. Thomas stared in disbelief. His grandfather had been right all along. If you're watching this and starting to see that sometimes the crooked path is the stronger one, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Because what happens next in Ashford will change everything everyone thought they knew about building, about strength, and about who really understood these mountains. Thomas drove straight to the community center. The parking lot was chaos. Families with hastily packed bags, children crying, dogs barking. Inside, Mayor Henderson was trying to maintain order while fielding calls from emergency services. Bill Crawford stood near the front, his face pale, arguing with a county inspector who'd arrived after the quake. When he saw Thomas walk in, something flickered across his expression. Not quite shame, but close. The inspector, a woman named Rodriguez, spotted Thomas immediately. "You're Merrick? The one with the cabins up on Ridge Road?" Thomas nodded, bracing for another attack. "I need to see them." Rodriguez's tone was urgent, professional. "Your structures and Crawford's showcase cabin are the only residential buildings in the direct impact zone. His failed. I need to see why yours didn't." Bill stepped forward, his usual confidence cracking. "Now wait just a minute. That cabin was built to code, engineered by professionals, and it shattered like glass." Rodriguez cut him off. "While apparently Merrick's unconventional structures are still standing. I need to understand why before we let anyone return to their homes." The room went silent. Every person who'd laughed at Thomas, every logger who'd called his work garbage, suddenly had their full attention on him. Thomas led a convoy back up the mountain. Rodriguez, the mayor, Bill Crawford, and half the town followed in their vehicles. When they arrived at Thomas's property, people climbed out slowly, staring at the 3 cabins that stood exactly as they had before the quake. Not a single log out of place. Rodriguez walked the perimeter, taking photos, measurements, notes. She knocked on joints, tested corners, crawled underneath to examine the foundation. 20 minutes passed in near silence, broken only by aftershocks that made people jump but left Thomas's cabins unmoved. Finally, Rodriguez stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "This is brilliant. Completely brilliant. These curved logs create a flexible framework. Instead of transferring stress to fixed points, the entire structure absorbs and distributes seismic energy. It's like," she paused, searching for words. "It's like the difference between a rigid tower and a willow tree in the wind." Bill Crawford stood apart from the group, staring at the cabins with an expression Thomas had never seen on his face before. Defeat mixed with reluctant respect. "How long have you been building like this?" Rodriguez asked. "My grandfather started in 1932, Thomas replied quietly. "He survived the big quakes, learned from them. Everyone thought he was crazy too." Rodriguez turned to face the crowd. "I'm recommending Thomas Merrick as a consultant for earthquake-resistant construction in this region. And I'm putting a hold on any building permits that don't account for seismic flexibility." The mayor stepped forward, her voice carrying across the property. "Tom, I owe you an apology. We all do. The aftershocks continued for 3 days. Each tremor sent people running to their windows, watching Thomas's cabins remain steady while Crawford's damaged showcase groaned and settled further into ruin. By Wednesday, the structural engineer Bill had threatened to bring in arrived, but not to condemn Thomas's work. He came to study it. Dr. James Whitmore had spent 30 years designing earthquake-resistant buildings in California. He walked through Thomas's cabins with the reverence of a man discovering something he'd been searching for his entire career. He measured the angles of the curved logs, calculated the stress distribution, tested the give and flex of each joint. Your grandfather understood something we're only now proving with computer models, Dr. Whitmore said, shaking his head in wonder. Natural curves create multiple load paths. When stress hits one point, it disperses through the entire structure instead of concentrating at rigid connections. This is biomimicry before we even had a word for it. The news spread beyond Ashford. A Seattle television station sent a crew, then a reporter from Portland. By Friday, Thomas found himself standing in front of his cabins, explaining his grandfather's wisdom to cameras while the reporter nodded enthusiastically. Bill Crawford appeared at Thomas's property that evening, after the media had left. He stood at the edge of the driveway, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking smaller somehow than he had a week ago. Thomas was stacking firewood but stopped when he saw Bill approaching. I came to say I was wrong, Bill said, the words clearly difficult for him. About your cabins. About your methods. About you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with years of mockery and disrespect. Thomas set down the log he was holding. Your showcase cabin can be fixed. The foundation is solid. You'd need to rebuild the walls, but it's not a total loss. Bill looked up, surprised. Why would you help me after everything I did? Because my grandfather taught me that strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing when to bend and when to hold firm. Thomas picked up another log, examining its natural curve. You've got good instincts, Bill. You just forgot that nature knows more than we do. Over the next weeks, something shifted in Ashford. Bill Crawford didn't become Thomas's best friend, but the mockery stopped. The younger loggers started asking Thomas questions about timber selection, about reading the grain, about working with the wood instead of against it. The Portland couple's cabin was completed in October. When they arrived for the first time, walking through rooms built with crooked logs that had already proven themselves earthquake-worthy, they wept with joy. They brought friends the next weekend. Those friends wanted cabins too. Mayor Henderson officially hired Thomas as the town's seismic construction advisor. The same town hall where he'd been humiliated became the place where he taught monthly workshops on flexible building techniques. 2 years later, Ashford looked different. Not dramatically, but in subtle ways that mattered. Alongside the traditional straight log cabins, new structures rose with gentle curves, intentional flexibility built into their bones. The town had learned to embrace both approaches, understanding that strength came in many forms. Thomas stood at the entrance to the Merrick School of Seismic Construction, a name that still felt strange to him. The building itself was his masterpiece, a teaching facility and workshop built entirely with curved timber. Students came from across the Pacific Northwest, architects and builders eager to learn techniques that computer models were now confirming as superior for earthquake-prone regions. Inside, 20 students worked at their benches, learning to read wood grain, to see potential in logs others would discard. Bill Crawford stood among them, not as a student but as a guest instructor, teaching precision techniques that complemented Thomas's flexibility-focused approach. They'd discovered their methods weren't opposites but partners, each strengthening the other. Sarah Chen's bookstore now had an entire section dedicated to sustainable and seismic-resistant building. Thomas's grandfather's old journals had been published, his observations from decades of mountain living now studied by engineering students at universities. The crooked cabin builder had become a footnote in architectural history textbooks, his grandson the bridge between old wisdom and new science. The young Portland couple, Emma and David, had become close friends. Their cabin had weathered 2 more significant earthquakes without a crack. They'd referred 17 other clients to Thomas, each one a testament to the power of word of mouth and proven results. Dr. Whitmore visited quarterly, collaborating with Thomas on research papers that were changing building codes across the western states. The man who'd been the town joke was now being cited in peer-reviewed journals. On a crisp November morning, Thomas walked through his grandfather's original cabin, the one built in 1932. It still stood, those ancient curved logs as solid as the day they were placed. He ran his hand along the worn wood, feeling the generations of wisdom embedded in every joint. His phone buzzed. Another inquiry, this time from a developer in Alaska wanting to discuss an entire community of seismic-resistant homes. Thomas smiled, thinking about how far things had come from those Thursday mornings at Hank's Hardware, enduring mockery while buying supplies for cabins no one believed in. The mountains had spoken, and finally people had learned to listen. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the end. If Thomas's journey from mockery to recognition moved you, I'd really appreciate if you could hit that like button and leave a comment below. What's a time when you stuck to your beliefs even when everyone doubted you? Share your story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories of people who trusted their instincts and changed everything. What topic should we explore next? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next one.